So if we start with the idea, if everybody's sort of sitting, and I'm just going to move my screen down a little bit so it's a little easier to see everything. So if we think about it from the perspective that we've just sort of got up out of bed, we're just sitting at the side of the bed and we want to try and start working on some of the things that you have mentioned. And so I think certainly if you, let's start from the ground up. So I'm going to go back a bit so you can see my feet a bit more. So if you're struggling at all, and lots of people say this, that they struggle with cramp or feeling like their feet are a little bit stiff, you can just do things where you're just sliding the foot out and pulling the toes back. So you're getting that big stretch through the calves, through the hamstrings, and slide the foot back in and just alternately do the legs. And so that just starts to get some of the circulation going through the lower body. And so if you do start to get cramp in the calf, for most people that's the problem, is what you want to do is activate the front of the thigh. And so when you pull the toes up, the calf can't go into cramp if the front of the shin is working, which it is at the moment. And so it's a great way to counteract any cramp that might happen, but also just to sort of stretch the feet out and get them moving. So you're just pulling the toes up as you slide the heel out, and then relaxing the foot as you come back. And you can just lift the toes up in this position, spread the toes out nice and wide, and just let them down on the floor gradually and slowly. So you're trying to think about spreading your foot out wider. And if you just do a few of those, and just thinking about your breathing as you're doing this. So breathe in as you lift your toes up, breathe out as you spread them out and take them down to the floor. Now with the movement in and out, we're helping the calves, the ankles, the feet, and the knees all at the same time, which is great. And we're going to go upwards into the spine. And so if you choose a spot at eye level to focus on, and when you breathe in, you want to feel like you're just sitting up as tall as you possibly can, which is going to give you a little bit bigger curve through your lower back. And then when you breathe out, you're still looking at that eye level, but you're going to round the spine. And then lift up on the in-breath, and then round the spine out again. Now, a good way to do this to make sure that you're getting the right things moving is to put one hand at the breastbone and one hand at the lower abdomen. And so when you breathe in, what you should feel, without lifting your head up and looking upwards, you're looking forwards, is that the space in between the hands is getting bigger. And when you breathe out, the space is getting smaller. And so the head is staying in exactly the same place. Now, the big benefit to that, keeping the head in the same place, is that we're actually loosening up part of the neck at the same time without moving the head. So if the neck's a little bit sore, it makes it easier to achieve something there. And then we can move on and actually actively work the neck. So breathe in, sit nice and tall. Make the space at the front go bigger. And then breathe out, make the hands go closer together, rounding the spine as much as you can. And so you're rolling upwards, sitting up nice and tall. You can see that actually, if I put my hands at my pelvis, that when I'm rounding out, my pelvis is tipping backwards. And when I'm sitting up tall, my pelvis is tilting forwards. And so the big thing to try and get better movement in your spine is to make sure that the pelvis works, because a lot of the time we're keeping the pelvis fixed and we're trying to stretch our backs out by doing other things. And the problem there is that the pelvis needs to move. And so then you're fixing the lower back, the last couple vertebrae, and you're making everything else work that little bit harder. So the lower back and the rest of the spine really need the pelvis to roll backwards and roll forwards. And so you want to make sure that you do that. So you can do that sitting on the side of the bed. And so I'm just going to turn forwards now. And so with the arms, if you just let them hang down at your sides, you can sort of reach down with one arm, but you want to keep your head central. So again, you're still looking at that place, eyes on the horizon, and then lifting back up, and then reach down with the other, and come back up. And so this is stretching through the sides of the neck. And again, if we keep the head still and we make the rest of the body do the moving, the muscles in the neck actually attach down to our rib cage. And so it makes it easier to move your rib cage than it does the head and neck when the neck is in a position where it's not happy to move. And so it's about trying to stimulate a little bit of movement there, so that when you do turn the head from side to side and just check the movement, that it actually feels like you've achieved something. So you could actually check the movement first, drop the shoulders afterwards, and you want to do maybe anywhere between sort of 6 and 8, and then that's 1 on each side, and then just recheck the neck movement to make sure that it feels a little bit easier. So when we go to get up from this position, we're going to put the feet directly underneath the knees, and we want to make sure that we lean forward with the body, because the biggest most powerful muscle is actually in the hips. And what a lot of us tend to do is we try to get straight up, and so we end up trying to push up and we're kind of unsteady, or we need to push to one side, and we end up leaning to one side. If I'm leaning and I go to get up from this position, the muscles on this side are already closing down and these ones are already open. And so I'm already putting things in a lot of stress, just trying to get up. And so the big thing is trying to use the hips more than the back. And so if you lean forward and have your feet directly underneath the knees, the direction you want to go is kind of forward and up. So if you think about going forward and up and letting the hips do the work, when you sit back down, you're doing the reverse. So you're folding at the hips to sit back behind you. Now, it's not necessarily the greatest thing to do on a stool with wheels, so I was a little bit careful there. If I was on something that was going to be staying where it was, I'd be much more confident. But essentially, we want to get a big fold at the hips, because what that's doing is opening the glutes, which is the back of your hip. And so when you stand up, the muscles at the front are going to open and the muscles in the back need to close. And so to get the biggest contraction and the most power in your hips, you have to open so that you can have more room to close. And essentially that's all we're doing, is taking it so that we open everything at the back of the hips. So when we stand up, it's the hips that are doing the work rather than our back, because most of us rely too much on our back for things and we don't allow the muscles that should support us to actually do the job. What else was I going to do? We're going to do balance and neck. So another neck exercise, we'll do that one in standing actually. So now you've come up using that amazing technique that I just told you. And I'm going to stand back here. So if you go into a movement where you push the hips side to side, we want to think about the tummy button going over top of the arch of the foot. And that's how we get our balance. And so if we haven't got that side to side movement, so if you just check to see where you are first, and that movement feels relatively okay and equal on both sides, then you can start to think about going into a balanced position. So if we start to bring our tummy button over top of the left arch and our foot feels stable, so we've got underneath the ball of the big toe, the little toe, and the heel on the floor, you should then be able to lift a leg up and balance. And you're going to waver around, but it's the body's way of trying to find the right muscles to hold you in place. And if you go across to the other side and bring your tummy button over the arch of the right foot, the same thing. So you should be able to balance there. So the key to getting the balance is having that side-to-side movement in the hips. And often what happens when somebody tries to balance is they don't actually get across far enough. And so when they go to lift the leg to balance, or they have to balance on one leg, if you're not directly over top of it, it's really hard to actually balance because your hips are still over there somewhere and they're not quite shifted across far enough. And so that side-to-side movement should happen when we walk. So when you take a step forward and you put your heel down, your hips start to move across to get on top of this leg so that this one can swing through. Now, if you haven't got that side-to-side movement when you're walking, and it happens so quickly we don't register it very well, but if you start to take a step and you can't get your hips across, what you end up with is a really short stride and it feels very flat-footed. And so the only way you can affect the timing of it all so that everything works properly is to get that side-to-side movement back. So when you stand up, it's quite a good idea just to do a little bit of side-to-side work. And if you have stiffness in the neck, the pelvis and the skull work in conjunction with one another. So if you have tightness here that you're not addressing, it's going to keep the neck not moving. So you need both sides to work together. So when we go side to side, and then the other direction that people feel stiff in with the neck tends to be rotation. So if we step in with the feet and we tuck our elbows in, we've done this in class before, you might not have realized why. You're going to look forwards at your fingertips and pull back with the other elbow. And so I'm just going to turn to my side along the white wall. So if you go into rotation and you're looking forward at your fingertips, again, everything underneath your body is turning, but you're keeping your head forward. And so the good way to check whether that works for you is to turn and look over one shoulder and turn and look over the other and see how you feel with that movement, and then go into this as an exercise. And so when you're rotating, your hips should rotate, your ribs should rotate, and you should have movement all the way down into your feet. So as I turn left, my left arch should lift. As I turn right, my right arch should lift, and your other arch should go down. And so if we're doing this rotation, and we do one on each side, which is maybe about 10, I'll just do a few more, and you get really big rotation through the rib cage in particular. Again, you're really affecting those neck muscles, but from the opposite end that you would think to stretch them. And then if you come back down and you recheck, looking over the shoulders, you should feel slightly easier. And so with the exercises, I always say, if you do an exercise and you see an improvement, then that's one you need to do. And you would take that and just keep working with it until you felt that the area you were trying to concentrate on improved. So with that, typically it's either the side-to-side movement that people are affected in the neck, or the rotation. So you've had an exercise that works for both of those. So it's either dropping the shoulder down, which if you wanted to do in standing up with the feet wide, as you were doing the hips, you keep the head in center and you just drop your arm into that open space. So you can either do this one sitting down the way you were doing it originally, or take it to a standing up one and do the hips and the neck at the same time. And so these are all really good ways just to sort of generally loosen the body up. I think I've done everything that everybody asked for. So we'll just have a quick check-in, and I'll just stop recording.